With the solar panel and the control system box modeled, we're going to look at the other major parts. We're going to start with the ground tube assembly, move on to the pump box, and finish with the comfort pad. The ground tube assembly consists of 4 major parts. Here we can see them all linked together with the pipe. A single one consists of a tube, a lid, and then a little pipe coming in, which is the overflow pipe. Let's start by looking at the larger component. It's quite simple. It's just a couple of extrusions, and I've rounded the corners off with a fillet. The top is just a simple flat extrusion, and I've added 3 holes. They are for the inlet, the outlet, and the overflow tubes. I've made those 1 inch in diameter and a 1/2 inch in diameter. You can size those accordingly. The elbow overflow is actually a swept feature. Most of the tubing will be made out of simple extrusions, but this one's a little more complex, so let's have a look at that. To create a sweep, we need a profile and a path. The profile is 2 concentric circles, and the path is a simple line with an arc. Now let's go back to the full assembly. There are 4 of these tubes. Now you could place them all individually. What I've done is place them as a pattern, and it's a rectangular pattern. You would select the first ground tube assembly and then add 3 more. And we can see the pipe that's connecting all of them, an inlet, an outlet, and an overflow. You can see here I've also added a slightly different one. This was created using the tube and pipe environment. That's a more advanced solution, but you'll see in the provided assembly an example of that, and you may want to try that later on. Now let's look at the pump box. The pump box houses the pump and has a number of holes placed in it for the inlet and outlet water going into the cooling pad. There's also a hole allowing the wiring from the solar panel, which provides power for the pump. Turn off the visibility of the pump box and you can see the pump that's inside. You can try modeling one of these if you wish, but I've actually supplied a pump for you that you can use. And here we see the cooler water coming into the pump, and they've been set into the cooling pad. Now let's look at how I created the pump box. There are 2 parts to it, just the lid and the base. The lid's a little more complex. We can see it as an extrusion, a shell, another extrusion, and something called an embossed feature. Let's look at how I created that. To create an embossed feature, you need a sketch. Here we see that sketch being used in the embossed feature. When I edit the sketch, you can see that what I did was I placed some text on the surface of the lid. It doesn't have to be right on the surface, but in this case I did that. Having placed the text, let's look at how the embossed feature was created. By editing the feature, we can see that I need to select a profile, which in my case was the text. I chose embossed, depth of 0.05, and changed the color of the surface to red, so we can see it a little more clearly. The box itself is quite straightforward, just an extrusion that I shelled out and gave it a wall thickness. And you can see the holes that I've added for the various pipes that are going in there. The last major part is the cooling pad. It consists of 2 parts. The cooling pad itself that Ted the Pooch sits on, and we turn off the visibility of that, we can see another supplied part. I suggest you use this one. This is where the cooling water would be entered on the left, and the slightly warmer water would come out on the right to go through the cooling process again. The more comfortable part for Ted the Pooch is just a simple cover. I made an extrusion, shelled that out, and then just to make it look a little better, I swept a couple of edges around there. You can make your own design. Now let's return to the assembly. If we were building this cooler, we'd have to insulate any of the pipes that were carrying water. And in terms of repurposing or reusing material, we could in fact use something like garden hose for those pipes rather than rigid pipe. Well, we've completed the modeling of the parts. What we want to do now is document the parts. I'm going to do that by moving into an IDW or drawing file. In this case, I've brought in the full assembly, added balloons, and a parts list. And I'd like to add the details of all of the parts into a single IDW file. So here we see the solar panel with some general dimensions. And because that's from the sheet metal environment, what I can do is bring in the flat layout. This is something that happens automatically within the sheet metal environment and allows us to dimension it. We could also export this data to a CNC machine and have it automatically created that way. You see I've got the control box, details of control box. Now we continue to add all of the details of the major parts in a single IDW file. We've now completed the modeling and the documentation of the Pooch cooler.